Thank you, Rennie. Good afternoon. I'm Deepa and I cover AI at CB Insights. Thank you for joining us today for our AI research briefing. In the next half hour or so, we'll look at various artificial intelligence trends to watch in 2018. And these trends are not only reshaping businesses, but also the economy and even policies and politics. When we talk about AI and automation, one of the main concerns right now is jobs. How is AI reshaping the labor market? How do we retrain our employees? What are the jobs going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Let's start off with talking about jobs in warehouses and manufacturing plants. It's counterintuitive to see this chart where manufacturing jobs are on the rise, because at the same time, the US is also adding more industrial robots in its factories. This means that companies are hiring, but at the same time, they're also heavily automating. A recent example is Tianyuan Garments from China. They're a major garment manufacturing company in China, and they are manufacturing garments for Adidas. And recently, they decided to open a plant in Arkansas and employ around 400 people. This is a trend where jobs that were traditionally outsourced are coming back closer to the site of demand. And the reason for this is that the price of robots are falling. Tianyuan is also partnering with a startup called Software Automation in Georgia, which builds robots that can stitch these garments together using computer vision. So from a supply chain perspective, it makes more sense for these companies to stay closer to where the end consumer is. Here's a quote from the chairman of Tianyuan Garments. "We will produce 800 t-shirts a day for Adidas, and even the cheapest labor markets can't compete with us." So what does this mean in the context of the graph that we initially saw, where manufacturing jobs are on the rise? Essentially, the nature of these jobs will never be the same again. Manufacturing sector might add more, for example, industrial engineers or mechanical engineers, but jobs like assembly line production jobs and fabrication are already heavily automated. And we've seen CEOs of corporations like United Technologies echo this concern. So the looming question is, how are we going to retrain the current workforce to meet our new requirements? And for the first time, white-collar jobs are facing something similar. Traditionally, job loss due to automation has been associated with physical robots. But now we're seeing a wave of expert automation and augmentation software in a variety of industries that is ushering in an era of AI-enhanced productivity. Almost all of the companies that we'll see soon require a human in the loop, but the bottom line is companies will need fewer hands on deck. Say, for example, you had 10 people in a team. Now, with AI-enhanced productivity, you may need 3 or 4 people. Here's a market map of over 40 startups that are using machine intelligence to replicate and augment human cognition in some way. And they're targeting different industries like law, media, wealth management, and trading. And some of these are more susceptible to automation in the near future than others. We'll take a look at a couple of examples. One is we're seeing a number of natural language processing startups that are cropping up in the legal field. The legal industry is very paper heavy and labor intensive, and it requires poring over thousands of pages of documents, which could take hours. And most of this work is done by entry-level professionals or associates. And now startups are saying that we're going to use machine learning to crunch all of that information for you and summarize it within minutes. One thing to think about is, how is this going to change how law firms charge their clients? Does it still make sense to charge by the hour when you have an algorithm that is condensing hours of work into minutes? Another example is software development, one of the professions that has always been considered a safe bet is software development. Here's a quote from Google CEO saying, over time, these could be loan systems which automatically write itself. And we're beginning to see early stage deals here. We'll have to see how many of these companies take off and do well, but the aim of most of these companies is to automate routine software testing and debugging as well as front-end development. One of the earlier entrants here is Applitools, which you see third from the top. And below that, DiffBlue from UK also raised a huge funding round recently. But that said, we know that one job that is in very high demand right now is AI researchers and AI software developers, which brings us to our next trend on AI talent wars. As we all know, hardware processing power and deep learning has unleashed this massive wave of AI applications. And because much of this acceleration happened in the last, say, 3 to 4 years, there's now a huge demand for AI talent. Every company wants to know how they can integrate machine learning into their products. And companies don't want to be left out. And in many cases, companies are not sure what they're looking for. But everyone is on a hiring spree. Because of this, there is a huge gap between the talent that is available right now and demand. And naturally, this is driving up the salary packages of the limited talent that is available. Here is where big tech companies are at an advantage because they can retain top talent with lucrative pay packages. Here's a screenshot of Google DeepMind's financial statement. If you average out the employee costs, it could be around $35,000. $350,000. $350,000 per annum or above. And China is also hiring. There are thousands of AI-related jobs on LinkedIn, which is a recruitment platform, and it's also a unicorn startup from China. And as you can see here, BMW in China is hiring a senior machine learning researcher and is willing to pay anywhere between $500,000 to $600,000 per annum. To top all of this, we're also seeing here's a recent report from Tencent that found that there are only around 300 qualified researchers in this field right now, and this includes students, but the demand is in the millions. To top all this, we're also seeing top researchers leaving big tech companies to work on their own startups. Andrew Ng left Baidu and started Landing.ai, which brings AI to manufacturing. Horizon Robotics that you see on the right is a chip maker in China, and their team also is made up of ex-Baidu employees. In our next trend, we'll focus specifically on China, or a comparison between the competition that's heating up in AI between US and China. The United States houses a number of AI startups. They have the most number of AI startups because of which they dominate global AI deal share. But if you see this chart over here, in the red is the red bar indicates US deal share, and it's dropping. It started off with 77% in 2013, and last year it was just 50%. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that there are more countries that are participating in AI activity worldwide than ever before. It was, I think, startups in over 50 countries raised equity rounds last year, and we've never seen this type of participation before. And we will continue to see more research coming out of countries like UK, Canada, and China. Particularly, the Chinese government has been very strategic about executing its plan of becoming an AI-first economy. This is a paragraph from a very detailed plan issued by the government last year, and they're following through on this. And in some areas of AI, China is already ahead. One of this is funding. China has far fewer AI startups than the United States. In fact, they only accounted for 9% of the global deal share. But you can see from the chart here that they accounted for nearly half the global equity funding. So essentially, right now, there are two big players in AI, China and the United States. Two things that are fueling this massive growth in China are facial recognition and AI chips. The Chinese government has very ambitious countrywide surveillance plans. And that is one reason why facial recognition has become so important there. And on the other hand, with AI chips, it's a direct challenge to US chip makers and China wanting to rely on homegrown chips. We'll take a closer look at the facial recognition activity here. It's very interesting. If you look at the chart, 1.6 billion in funding went to computer vision startups there in 2017. This is not just equity, this chart also includes government grants. There are three key players here in facial recognition in China. One is SenseTime, which is a unicorn. Then CloudWalk, which recently got a 300 million grant from the government. And then there's Face++, which reportedly has 1.3 billion face records of Chinese citizens. And Face++ has a diverse set of investors. It raised a huge funding round recently, backed by the Russian government, the Chinese government. It raised money from corporations like Foxconn Technology and also Ant Financial, which belongs to the Alibaba Group. So apart from their commercial interests, Alibaba and Foxconn have also previously partnered with the government on smart city projects in China. And these projects include analyzing not just surveillance footage, but also social media feed. Another area which reflects China's R&D efforts is its patent activity. There was a huge jump in the number of patents published there, and these are just based on keyword searches of title and abstract. And also these are based on the publication date. There could be a delay between when someone applied for a patent and when it was published. All of this is leading to increased scrutiny of cross-border investments and technology swapping. A couple of years ago, a startup called Neurela came under a lot of scrutiny for raising funds raising a debt round from Chinese investors after getting grants from the US Air Force and NASA, for example. So, but despite this, we are seeing that investors in both countries are actively investing in startups across the border. So this is something we think will continue to heat up, and there are some companies that operate in both countries, which further blurs competitive lines. So this was a data heavy section. These are some of the data points we looked at to compare US and China's AI activity. Now let's move on to something very important. It's called AI for X, and it's everywhere. Did you know that there is now AI for weed? You can use computer vision to identify the gender of cannabis plants. There is also AI for fish. A startup called Deepfish in Russia is using neural networks to identify the type of fish that fishermen catch. And there is AI for horses. Sweden's Hoofstep raised VC money to study horse behavior using deep learning. I can go on, the list is endless. There's AI for beer brewing and even making your own shampoo the way you want it. These may sound like absurd examples, but they're very important because they show us that machine learning is not some exotic technology that's out there, but it's becoming a basic building block for modern software. Which brings us to our next trend, which is that the machine learning hype is going to die. Here are some statistics to put the machine learning frenzy that we've been seeing into perspective. Since 2016, over 1,100 new startups have raised equity for the first time, and all of them claim to be using machine learning in some way. Last year, in 2017 alone, investors poured in more than $15 billion in equity funding. That was a 141% jump from the previous year. Incubators across the world saw a flood of new AI startups, and that grew almost 3 times compared to 2016. Here's a quote from Frank Chen at E16Z. He said, he wrote, "I believe that in 2 years, no investor is going to be explicitly looking to fund AI-powered startups." And that is because it would be understood that all software will incorporate ML to whatever degree necessary. And machine learning has already penetrated virtually every major piece of software, from our calendar apps to search engines to sales management software. This is a heat map that you see on the right. It shows equity deals across AI equity deals across every industry. We track them and update them every month. So from agriculture to cybersecurity to retail, we're already changing how we get things done and how we interact with technology. And so soon, it's not going to be enough to just be an ML-based company. Investors are going to become more picky and look at things like how robust is your technology? What is the competitive landscape? What are the other companies here and what are they doing? And is this business model feasible? This is closely related to our next trend, which we'll be watching out for this year. And that is, can smaller enterprise AI companies survive in a market dominated by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft? As I mentioned before, with the ML frenzy, many companies struggle to understand what this new wave of AI meant for them and how to integrate machine learning into their products. And so a number of startups cropped up to provide machine learning as a service. Enterprise AI startups raised nearly $2 billion in 5 years, and a lot of VCs participated in these deals. But now, big tech companies are scaling up their enterprise AI offerings, which begs the question of whether some of these smaller startups can survive. Recently, Amazon reported in its earnings call that AWS saw a $5 billion revenue in the fourth quarter. Microsoft also reported huge revenue growth for its cloud services, and it's competing neck to neck with Amazon. And Google released CloudML, which allows users to bring their own data and train the algorithm to suit their unique needs. Apart from this, there are also a number of open source libraries, software development kits, APIs, all of this available to developers. And in a big way, all these tech companies have lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of the smaller corporations and companies. And a lot of the core AI research also happens at the top and then trickles down. So one such research papers from Google got a lot of attention last year. It introduces something called capsule networks. As we all know, deep learning has fueled the majority of AI applications today. And within deep learning, there are different types of architectures. A popular architecture in deep learning is called convolutional neural networks. Despite their success, convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, have certain shortcomings that may not only lead to a lack of performance, but also security gaps. So this is a very basic illustration of a human face. One of the problems with CNN is that it would detect the individual features, right? So there are 2 eyes, there's a mouth, there's a nose, and then it would say, this is a face. Now, Google's Geoffrey Hinton published a research paper last year that introduces the concept of capsule networks. and promises to overcome some of these issues. So in the same example that we saw previously, capsule networks would not only consider the individual features, but also their relative position. For example, what is the relative position of the mouth compared to other features on the face? And so it would be better equipped to correctly say that this is not a face. Oftentimes, also, another issue, without getting into all the technical details, another disadvantage of convolutional neural networks is that they require a huge amount of training data. And here you see images on the top and the bottom rows, both of which represent the same object, but from different viewpoints. And in the real world, the angles you have to extrapolate are messier, and being able to extrapolate more from the same data is valuable. And that is something capsule networks promise to do. And the paper also claims CapsNets are less prone to hacking attacks. So in this image, we have a panda. And now if you introduce a tiny invisible variation that would be invisible to the naked eye, it completely throws the algorithm off into believing this to be a gibbon, which is a type of ape. Now, capsule networks also promise to be less prone to such types of attacks. The paper is still in its review stage, and it will need to be tested in practical scenarios. But this is something we will be watching out for this year. And finally, we'll wrap up with a trend in healthcare, specifically diagnostics. Coming back to the heat map that we saw earlier, healthcare is the hottest area for investment within artificial intelligence, and it has consistently remained this way for several months now. And within healthcare AI, one of the main subcategories that is driving this growth is imaging and diagnostics. The FDA recently approved a cloud computing platform developed by startup Arteris for analyzing cardiac images, reportedly based on a series of tests for accuracy and speed of diagnosis. Now, it is now applying for FDA approval for AI in oncology. And you can see from the investor list here, it's backed by investors like GE Ventures. And we're also seeing strong public partnerships here. NVIDIA and GE recently announced that they'll be working together to bring deep learning capabilities to all of GE's medical devices. And GE is a huge player here. Of course, we know about Google DeepMind's partnership with NHS, and recently AstraZeneca announced that it will be partnering with Ali Health, which is a part of the Alibaba Group in China, for AI-assisted screening and diagnostics. Looking at these public partnerships, it is clear that there are a lot of big players here, from AI companies to pharmaceutical companies to hospitals and med devices. But this hasn't stopped smaller startups from entering the space. Around 78 new companies raised equity for the first time in healthcare AI last year. And we're very excited to see where these applications go in 2018, because it has huge potential not only to reduce error in diagnosis, but also enable earlier detection of several diseases. That brings us to the end of our research briefing. But if you click on this link below, it'll take you to the entire AI Tech Trends report. We did a 5,000-word deep dive into all of the topics we discussed today, but also many more. And right now, I'll take a couple of questions. But if I don't get to your question, please write to me at dvardarajan@cbinsights.com or tweet at me at deepalearning. one of the questions is, other than US and China, what are the other countries that are focusing more on AI research and advances? There's a lot of activity in Canada right now. UK is going to be ramping up its AI efforts. Recently, India and China partnered to push forward their AI research. Sorry, not India and China. India and Japan partnered to push forward their AI research. So yeah, but Canada and UK would be countries to watch out for here. And then we have a question on, where are we with artificial general intelligence? We are not very far with artificial general intelligence. All of the applications today are very narrow, but a sum of all these narrow applications are having a huge impact on markets and economies, as we just saw. A few companies have raised funds to develop general AI, but it's very much in the research stage. Someone asked, human healthcare is a hot AI area. What about pet care? Off the top of my mind, the only companies I can think of right now is Hoofstep, which we saw earlier, which is partnering with animal care hospitals to use behavioral analysis to improve animal health. But if you can write to me, I can look and see what else we have. How does AlphaGo achievement change the landscape, if at all? So the New York Times reported a couple of months ago that it was in fact AlphaGo's initial victory that sort of fueled China's AI plans. And recently we saw Tencent come out with their own version of AlphaGo. I think it was called Fine Art. So yeah, that definitely definitely drew everybody's attention to what AI can do today. Are you aware of any startups using capsule networks? Like I mentioned, the paper is still in its research and in its review stage. So practical applications something we will be watching out for in the future. Besides diagnostics, what else are you seeing strong growth for AI in healthcare? There were a lot of partnerships between startups and pharma companies for drug development. GlaxoSmithKline was particularly active. They funded 2 startups here to help them speed in the process of discovering molecules. I think we'll take one more. What's the activity in What's the activity in financial services and AI? We've done some extensive research on AI and fintech. A lot of automation applications in investment management. We've seen search engines that have been developed specifically for the financial services market. Of course, there is AI in trading, so a bunch of different applications, but I'd be happy to forward you an in-depth report or a market map if whoever asked the question can write in. That said, the link to this webinar deck as well as the entire 38-page AI trends report will be sent out to you shortly after this webinar. Once again, feel free to write to me or tweet at us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much for listening today, and have a great day.